BBC Radio 5 Live.
Good morning, it's 5 Live. This is your call. It's 9 o'clock. I'm Nicky Campbell. It's Gary Speed's widow, Louise, told the inquest into his death yesterday his job had put a strain on their marriage, that he'd talked in terms of taking his life in the days before he died. But she said he dismissed the idea because of their children. We asked this morning, how do you know when someone is close to the brink? Call us now. Alan Shearer, who was Gary's, with his friend Gary the day before his death, told the court it just didn't and still doesn't make sense to him. So how do you know when someone is that close to ending their life? What can you do? How can you help somebody you think could be staring into the abyss? We'd love to hear your thoughts, your insight, your experiences this morning. We'll also give you all the information you need if it's something that affects you or something that you are struggling with. Jed Flynn is Chief Executive of the suicide prevention charity Papyrus. He says it's a tough subject to broach with someone.
Our anxiety about asking the question is fueled by a hope that we're not going to dig into something that's sort of latent, where actually the reality is most people who have been suicidal report to me and others that having been asked, there's such a great sense of relief that they want to talk about being suicidal.
How do you know when someone is close to the brink? 0500 909 693, text 85058.
5 Live.
Difficult, but such an important issue this morning. How do you know when someone is close to the brink? Now, if any of the issues that we're discussing affect you, you can go to bbc.co.uk/action line, and there you will find contact details for a range of charities. The suicide prevention charity Papyrus can be contacted on 0800 068 4141. That's 0800 068 4141. And Stephen Hapgood, to whom we spoke earlier, whose son Christopher killed himself 2 years ago, is from Papyrus. Are those all the numbers necessary, Stephen? Or
that's it, yes. I mean, they can look us up on a search engine and look up Papyrus or Young Suicide and find us. Our helpline is staffed from 10 till 10 each day, and it's staffed by healthcare professionals. So if a parent is concerned about their child, or if a partner is concerned about their husband or wife, or if a young person is concerned about themselves, they can phone us and they'll get the best advice we can give them.
Well, thank you, and we will reiterate and give those numbers out again throughout our hour. Stephen is with us. Another Steve. Steve has texted us. Good morning, Steve.
Yeah, good morning, Nicky.
Hello there. And Mark's in Stoke-on-Trent. Hello, Mark.
Hi, good morning, Nicky.
And Peter in Durham, Tyne and Weir. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Nick.
You know, Peter, Stephen said something earlier on. It's 75% young men and males who have. We'll just reiterate the point you made, Stephen Hapgood. Then we'll bring Peter. Peter in.
Predominantly young men who will take their life. It's 75% or so of young men. Young girls often self-harm and grow out of that, and I think that they're more attuned to saying how they feel than the young men are.
Peter, what do you make of that?
I just think, well, you said that Shearer was with that guy the day before, and he didn't know a thing about it. People, if you talk about it, it's going to help. If you don't talk about it, if you just keep it all wrapped inside, there's nobody can help you. You've got to talk about these things. Men traditionally don't tell anybody what's happening about them at all. Women talk a little bit, but you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you speak about it, you've got a chance. But if you keep it all wrapped up inside and just it goes round and round in your head, and that's when it happens, isn't it?
You've got to articulate. You've got to get it out. You've got to talk about your emotions.
Spit it out. And I mightn't. Men are just so self-conscious, man, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Do you have any experience of this? I mean, what's your own?
No, I've got no experience at all. But everything you see, nobody had a clue that Paul was in so much trouble. Everybody said he had a great life. What was he worried about? Things just get on top of you, and before you know it, you're on the bottom.
Yeah, Mark, what do you think?
Right. Well, I think that point is very debatable, whether you should speak about it or whether you should repress it. Because when some people do speak about it, it brings back so much trauma that they do actually end up committing suicide. I agree, men generally don't speak about their emotions. We live in a very repressed society. Most men that have some kind of trauma on their mind will just go out and drink, which is, we have to admit, a form of self-harming. But for me, I mean, the main point we're not really touching on, and we have to touch on, is this. Society does not want to talk about depression. It's a self-defense mechanism. If you accept that depression exists, have to accept that there's a reason behind it. Therefore, you have to accept that a lot of humanity is bad. There are a lot of psychopaths, there are a lot of child abusers, there are a lot of evil people in this world. That's the main reason why we don't accept depression, and we prefer to label people as mad. Now, I know for a fact some people who have come forward as survivors of child abuse have actually killed themselves. So for that gentleman to say it's better to talk about it is very debatable. Some people have been through so much trauma in their life, it is physically and mentally impossible to talk about it. They will actually end up killing themselves. I know for a fact when I had to recall the specific events of the child abuse, if I had a gun, I wouldn't be speaking to you now, Nicky. I can guarantee you I'd be 6 foot under. There is no way on earth I would have lived.
So some things are just...
You have to accept that.
Some things are better left unsaid and untouched and unremembered.
Completely, and we have to accept. Everyone listening to this now will be saying, oh, depressed, get out of bed or whatever. Some people cannot get out of bed. The cortisol in the brain has been so damaged through horrific, repetitive, traumatic events that it is absolutely impossible for them to do it. It's absolutely impossible for them even to interact in society. Even leaving the house can be such a traumatic event that they choose to go back.
Stephen, what do you say? Stephen Hapgood, what do you say to Mark, our caller there? Some things just do not bear thinking about.
A range of complex sort of points he's made there. I think, yes, there are some. Papyrus say that some suicides are preventable. We acknowledge that we will never prevent them all, that some people are so caught up in their illness or their condition or their state of mind that it's going to be difficult for us to sort of get through to them. But I think that most of the evidence is that people who are traumatized or troubled, that talking about it, raising it with professional people, bringing it into the open, saying how they feel, is the way in which it can be dealt with. And I don't know of any evidence which says that keeping it to yourself and keeping it locked up is good for you.
Well, there is evidence. You hear it. A lot of psychologists say it's better actually not to express. Now, I remember on another...
I don't know any psychologist that would say that. I'm sorry.
We hear all the time. I'll give you an example. Talk Sport. There was a phone-in one day, George Galloway. We rang up and she said her twin sisters committed suicide because they had to remember the child abuse. That's an example. I've heard it many, many times, psychologists saying this idea that it's better to express is very dangerous because for some people, I'm talking about the people who have been through horrific events throughout their life. You know, maybe they had horrific parents eaten up all the time, or they weren't given food, or they had a horrific repetitive child abuse. Sure. You have to be extremely careful to have this black and white saying, you know, that...
But isn't it right to talk about them, to come to understand them, to come to deal with them, to empower yourself so that you can march on in life?
Well, yes and no. As I said, it depends exactly who you are, Nicky. Everyone has had a different experience of life. Some people, they go through the day wishing to be dead. They wake up every single morning wishing that they weren't alive.
Allow me to bring in Steve. Stay there, Mark, please.
Sure.
Steve, it's not your real name.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. Well, listen. You're on the radio, and I know you've suffered from depression for the last 8 years. What do you think about what you've heard so far?
It's interesting to listen to two sides of the argument, Nicky. My reason for texting this morning was I thought it would be useful to perhaps try and give an insight to people who perhaps didn't know too much about the sort of thing you're talking about this morning. My depression, I would say, isn't born from any huge event in my childhood, such as child abuse. I had a great upbringing with two wonderful parents who I still love greatly, and indeed if it wasn't for them at the moment, then perhaps I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you just now. I would have said initially my feelings about suicide in general were born from the last 18 months to 2 years of my life, where I've had maybe 3 or 4 significant experiences where I would suggest to you that perhaps if people dealing with one of these things or 2 of these things on their own, that would be okay. But it now seems to be almost a point where so many things have happened over the past, say, 24 months. These feelings have really come back to the fore for me. I wasn't suicidal in my initial depression 8 years ago. This is a very kind of new thing for myself within the last, say, 12 to 18 months. But it really, really is a fear. It's a real fear of just absolutely everything that I touch at the moment. I consider myself quite an intelligent person, so I do like to try and get to the bottom of where my depression comes from. So I have tried to do that.
Do you think what's happened in your life has given you depression, or you have depression and what's happened in your life has brought it out and made it worse? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I'm not too sure, because I genuinely believe if I had depression, I would consider myself a strong enough person to get out of that. But I kind of feel as if now I live almost in a repetitive cycle, whereas it will go away, it will come back, it will go away. But because I've had it before, and because I knew how bad it was, when I get it now, I get it really, really bad. And the gentleman said previously, there is almost an effect where I just cannot get out of bed in the morning.
Describe a little bit more, Steve, for those who have never suffered from this, who can't quite get their head round it, what that feeling is like, the black dog, as it is sometimes described.
Nicky, I'll try and paint a picture for you that really describes it to me perfectly. For anybody who's seen the film Trainspotting, good Scottish film, as you'll know, there's a scene in Trainspotting where one of the cast is basically cold turkey, trying to stay off the heroin. So his parents lock him in his bedroom, and the music gets faster and faster, and the walls get closer and closer and closer, and he's just trying to get further and further under the duvet. And for me, it's very much a nighttime thing, because speaking to you just now, I'm out and about today, I've got some work to do today, and I don't feel too bad. And yet, at night time is when it really starts, because when I turn the telly off, or I put the book down, and I turn the light out, that to me is at a time when a person should be at their most rest, calmest before their sleep. Whereas for me, that's when it starts, because my mind doesn't have anything else to concentrate on, it invariably starts to drift towards the thoughts that I don't want to have, and then it's almost like an avalanche effect, because once it starts, I just cannot stop. And I could not tell you honestly the last time where I maybe turned the light off at, say, 10 p.m. at night and slept through to my alarm going off in the morning. But I'll wake up during the night, and when I'm feeling really low, or when I feel my depression's at its worst, the thoughts in my head would give any sane person real fear. They just drift towards thoughts of, well, if I was to take my own life, how would I do it? Where would I do it? Who would I tell?
What kind of support do you have?
I don't tend to really, because, as I say, my parents are just two of the most amazing people in the world, and if they knew I felt like that, I don't think my mum would ever recover from that, you know?
If they turned the radio on and heard you and recognised you, and you are not Steve, that's the name you're using, would this be a complete revelation to them?
Absolutely. Because when I see my parents, or when I see my friends, I like to paint a different picture, because it's almost like a release, if that makes sense. You know, you almost get to escape from it for a while, to live a normal life, to be a normal person. But then, you know, you come away from that, and you come back to your own time and the thoughts that you had. I was speaking to a researcher previously, and we've both actually just finished reading the same book about the German goalkeeper Robert Enke that you mentioned previously.
Yes.
And there's a line in that book where the gentleman who writes the book described depression as a fear of fear. And I would go even further than that, because I think it's generally a fear of everything. It just is. It's a fear of everything, and an absolute inability for me to forget the things that have happened to me in my past. Certainly as a sufferer of depression, people will say to you all the buzz phrases, you know, things like just look forward and live in the future and forget what's happened previously. And I would love to do that. It's not that I don't want to do that. I absolutely physically cannot do that.
Stephen, what would you say to Steve?
I think he's very brave coming on the radio to say what he said. I think he needs help. I think he needs some medication. And I think when I read the letter my son left me, I know that he felt very much the same. He felt ashamed of how he felt.
Helpless and hopeless.
Felt embarrassed by it. He wanted to kind of live be seen to live a normal life, so he kept it to himself. And that's why it was such a shock when he died.
Nicky, sorry. In terms of medication, Stephen, as I say, I'm perfectly happy to accept the fact that this is perhaps something I can't dig myself out of without seeking further help. So I've been to see my GP 3 or 4 times over the last 2 years, I would say. you know, she's